Welcome to the Black Male Impact. Today we have as guest Dr. Derek Moore. Dr. Moore, welcome to the Black Male Impact.
Hello, Dr. Cross. Thank you for having me on this afternoon. Thank you.
Man, it's a pleasure having you here with us today. Dr. Moore is the president of New Mexico Junior College. He's also experienced in higher education, executive, and demonstrate history of working in higher education industry. He's also skilled in leadership and strategic planning and also professional development. But I'll give Dr. Moore the opportunity to talk more about himself before we get into the conversation today.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cross. And I think you said it very, very clearly and plainly. I have over 25 years of higher education experience along with workforce development experience. I've been here at New Mexico Junior College, finishing up my second year as the president here at the college. And I'm a former Arkansan. And so I've worked at various institutions in the great state of Arkansas. Those include rural institutions as well as those institutions have urban and suburban and metropolitan areas and regional institutions as well. So thank you for having me on your show, and certainly looking forward to interacting with you on this great subject.
Man, that's awesome, man. And that's really commendable, serving over 25 years in higher education. Often you hear they need more Black men. So by you being there, especially now as the president, I know a lot of young Black men looking up to you to see, just for admiration or inspiration, to realize that they too can achieve beyond the ordinary. So it's really commendable, for you to be in the position that you're in at this point. So we're going to get into the conversation itself. So I'm going to start off with this question. What is the mindset that it takes to make a positive impact?
Sure, that's a great question, Dr. Cross. And my response, it'll just be in my personal opinion as well. Two things I always say is, one, I reserve the right to be wrong. I reserve the right to change my mind. But when you think about, what I believe it takes to make a positive impact is that, one, listening. I think that a good leader has to really, if they're going to make an impact, they have to be willing to listen. Then I think, two, is to be able to allow for collective input in the role that I'm in and in previous roles, but even more so in this particular role. I have to make sure that I listen, and I have to also make sure that I gather collective input. That helps me to be able to make a better decision, which I strive to make sure that it brings about a positive impact, whatever that decision, whatever area it entails.
And I really like that perspective of being a listener, because sometimes when we're thinking about making an impact, we want to make the impact only from our thoughts. And to make the impact, which includes others or will impact other people, we should be willing to listen to other people so we can get the collective voice to make sure we're making the decisions that can really impact everyone that's around us, especially when we're in leadership positions. We have to hear the voices and ideas and insights of those around us so we can make the best decisions. So I really appreciate you sharing that perspective, because sometimes we forget how important it is to take the collective voice when we're thinking about making a positive impact. And that leads me to my next question. What advice do you have for the men listening and how they can play a role in creating a positive change?
I think, and again, that's a great follow-up question to your first question. And my response to that is that we have to realize that small incremental steps are impactful. And so sometimes it's about taking situations and issues when it comes to creating positive change, is to not taking it in one big chunk, but oftentimes small incremental steps. That's progress. And the reason why I say that is because when you take small incremental steps, you can kind of read the room. You can kind of gather insight on the tone. You can kind of check the pulse of what your next steps will be versus taking initial huge, gigantic steps that you feel that may make a positive impact. Those small incremental steps, there's momentum. If you think about it, when a snowball starts out small, when it rolls down the hill, but as it gets to the bottom of the hill, it is increased in size and it has increased in impact. But it starts out small because it gathers information, it listens, and it gets collective input, and then I think that will have the most successful impact. So I think that's one of the things as far as men that we should consider is that although we want to make change, we want impact to occur. It's not an instantaneous act. So just be aware that small incremental steps can be as impactful as huge, gigantic steps as well.
And thanks for sharing that. And I think that's a really valid reminder, especially now when we're thinking about where we go from here. Because when we look at a change that needs to be made, we may think, oh, we have to make big steps. And that reminder is really critical now, because small step, as you mentioned, can really take us to where we want to be. We just have to be consistent in taking those small steps when we're thinking about making a difference. But from your position right now, and the change, or sitting as the president, what change do you see, especially from your perspective right now, that is immediate, that can really impact especially younger Black men?
I think one is whatever employment sector one may be within, if it's higher education, if it's K-12, if it's in private business, take a look at the organizational or the strategic plan of that organization, of that business, of that company. Because when you look at the strategic plan, that gives you an idea of where the institution should be moving. And if you are aware of that strategic plan or the strategies, then that helps you to better craft input, conversation, asking questions, things of that nature. I learned this early on in my higher education career, is that I always had in my folder a 4 or 5 pillars related to the strategic plan, so that whenever I raised my hand or made a comment or listening or in an environment or committee meeting or whatever the case is, I could gauge whether or not that conversation was leading towards strategies within the strategic plan. So I think that's one, as far as men, as we come to the table, we have to come to the table knowing exactly what's at stake, knowing the strategies of the institution or the organization. And when you talk from that standpoint, then ears start to perk up and ears start to listen. And perhaps someone will say, well, this young man has actually studied where we are as an institution, as an organization, as a company. So I think being aware of the strategic plan of any institution can help in that conversation.
I really appreciate you saying that, because someone who are young, on the journey, want to make an impact, should want to learn what the organization is about, so they can understand what they need to do, because they want to be in alignment with the organization so they can help the organization move forward. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because sometimes you want to share your idea, not knowing what's already there. And sometimes it's great to know what's already there, so you can be better prepared. As you mentioned, once you start talking from the strategic plan, they know that you have studied. And once you have studied, they can now listen to you, because now this person is aware and knowledgeable of what needs to be done. So I think that's a great reminder for all of us, especially when we're on the journey and want to make an impact. And especially when we're in an organization, we need to be aware of where they are and where they want to go. And that leads me to my next question. How can we, as Black men, help to change the narrative today?
I think, I thought about this question, and my response would be is that we have to find a specific area of focus, meaning that oftentimes we can look at there is a big picture, understandably, but sometimes we look at the broad strategy or the broad way as it relates to that, broad focus areas. But if we can find a specific area of focus and put our energies into that, I think that that way it allows for additional collective input from others who may have done the same thing. And then whatever the situation may be, it's a little more permeable, if you allow me to say that, because I have, whomever has, young man has decided they're going to find a specific area of focus and get all the information they can and bring that information to the conversation and equips themselves so that they can continue to move forward.
I really love that perspective. I really love that perspective. Have a specific area of focus because one, as men, we cannot do all the work that needs to be done. And the more we're into what we want to do or have the desire to do, we will develop the skills and have a stronger desire to do the work. So I think that is a great reminder because there's so much that we can do or needs to be done, but we cannot put ourselves in all the different places that work needs to be done. So having a specific area of focus, I think that will help us to, make connection with the right people as well as we go forward to make the difference that we want to make.
And I want to just follow up on that. Within that process of the area of focus is for us to make sure that we build the trust and we allow the next person to function in their area of focus at their pace as well. It's often been said that even if I have experience in a certain area or a certain task, and if someone else is doing that task, let them customize that to their abilities as well. If they get to the same end result that I got to, and it was in an ethical way, just because it wasn't my strategy or the way that I did it, but if it was ethical, I'll trust that that's okay. And I think that's something that we as men that we have to be very, very mindful of is that everyone may not do or utilize or go the same route that I did, but if it was a success ethically, then be okay with that.
Man, that is so powerful right there because when it comes to us as Black men, we tend to maybe competing against each other. And as you mentioned that the conversation that's going on now, where we need to move into is to find ways to collaborate with each other. And as you mentioned, that helps to build the trust. And if we're going to really move forward as a force, we have to build the trust with each other because I think we have been conditioned over the years to have this distrust amongst each other. And we have to learn to value what the next person bring to the table, as you mentioned, because everyone is going to bring their strengths or what they're good at. But I really like how you have put it. Once it's been done in an ethical manner, appreciate what that person brings to the table because together we will get more done. And I think that's where we need to move to as Black men if we're going to see the change that we want. So I really like your perspective on that, where we focus on a specific area and also learn to build trust amongst each other, because I think we need the collective to move the needle forward as we should, which leads me to my next question. I know you have been in education for over 25 years. So what or who has influenced or inspired you to pursue the path that you're on?
Well, and I would say the what that has influenced me is that, as mentioned previously, I've worked at a few institutions of higher education, and oftentimes I was the only Black male on the management team, right? And realizing that there wasn't any on the executive team, and so that encouraged me to do what I needed to do in reference to education and experience to try to impact change, and realizing that sometimes if there is a voice that's missing and which there is, and it had been, and still are in some instances in higher education in executive level positions or roles. And so that encouraged me to realize that I needed to have a seat at the table so that other opinions and other perspectives could at least be heard. I think another that helped me as well is mentors, formal and informal mentors. When you think about the who, so I talked about the what. When you think about the who, those formal and informal mentors. And I'm gonna throw this out here and mention this because this is just part of my journey. And so within my journey, uh, uh, many of the major influences who served as mentors and paved the way for me have not been individuals of color. Of course, there were a couple in whom I looked to who were in various roles and things of that nature. But for those who directly, said as a president, I'm going to give you an opportunity to lead an initiative. As a vice chancellor, I'm going to give you an opportunity to lead a program. As a president, I'm going to give you a chance to be my vice president. And in every one of those scenarios and situations, it was to where I have advanced as far as in an executive level role. It has been a non-person of color. So I said that to say is that do not, as a Black male, do not discredit our fellow colleagues who may not be of color.
Correct.
Because if you're grounded in reference to some of the things I mentioned earlier and knowledgeable things about strategic planning and listening and collective input and all those types of things, that will get recognized in due time. So those were the influences as relates to the what and then relates to the who as far as formal and informal mentors.
I really appreciate you sharing that the people who have given you the opportunity and maybe open doors for you are not always people of color. And sometimes we have to be open because in some spaces, we may not have people of color in the leadership roles. And if we're not open to learning and to be collaborative with others, we may miss out on those opportunities. We have to know what we want and where we want to go and the impact. And as you mentioned, to have a seat at the table, to be able to voice the opinions for those who may not able to share their challenges or concerns. But being that you are at the table, you can speak for those who may not be able to speak for themselves because they're not in the room when the decisions are being made. So that one thing that I really appreciate, because somebody have to be at the table to speak on behalf of those who may not be able to be at the table. But I will ask this question, being that you've been on the journey for over 25 years, did you start out knowing that this is where you want to be? You want to be a president, you want to be the leader of the institution or of a institution in higher education?
Not exactly. I was, earlier in my career, I was working with a workforce development organization, and there was new funding, and I was selected to actually lead that particular group, and it was a collaboration among education, training, and support service providers, and someone noticed, my leadership skills and mentioned that I needed to commended me and mentioned that I needed to get my master's degree, and so I did that, and so as I continued forward, there were others who would give me various tasks and things of that nature, and said that you need to be a college president. So even after hearing that, it wasn't something that I set my sights on to say, well, my end goal is to be a college president or chancellor. It just happened to evolve to that particular situation. To whereas I had to ask myself, why not? And I had others saying, well, you can do these particular roles. And so it just evolved to that standpoint and recommendations from others as well to move to sit in that particular seat as a chancellor or a president. But no, not initially. It wasn't even during my undergraduate studies and my master's studies. But as I continued to go forward, it was well, it's like this is how you can really make an impact and others can see it. So I think that's another tip too, is that sometimes others see the value that you can add, and we need to be open, to some of that input.
I think that's a valid point because when you're open to feedback from others, people will tell you or point out strengths in yourself that you sometimes overlook because we are with ourselves most of the time. So for us to become aware of some of the things that we can do, others may have to say, man, you're doing great in that area. And if we're open and take advantage of those positive feedbacks, it can really lead us to places that we sometimes didn't think would be possible. And also, being that you said others have pointed out to you the things that you can do, what would you share to a younger Black male who are upcoming and have the desire to make an impact, a great impact within higher education? What would you advise that young man to do?
So here's one, and again, you're interviewing me, so I'm going to give you my opinion related to this, and so there are three things that I've come to live by, taking a reflective look back, I'll coin it from the phrase of recognize, follow, but don't predict. Okay, and so what I've called the RF P phenomenon. So recognize what's going on in your life. Recognize what God is doing for you. Because sometimes we can get so busy that we don't stop to recognize what's going on. How am I being guided? And then two is to follow that momentum. Once you stop and recognize where you're going, what's happening, what's going on, follow that momentum. And then three is very, very important for me, and I think it can be for others as well, is don't predict what's going to happen next. Because sometimes we can get into that streamlined approach in reference to, okay, here's what's happening to me, here's what's going on, here's how God's guiding me. So I'm going to follow that. And so this is what I'm going to predict next. And that happened to me, as on my journey. I took an administrative role. And I was in an administrative role for about 11 months. And someone at another institution called and said, I need you to come and to be our associate vice chancellor. And I'm like, wow, I've only been in this situation for 11 months, right? And so, and my institution understood that, that was a great opportunity for me to take advantage of. I took advantage of it. So I'm in this other role, this associate vice chancellor's role, for about 12 months. And I'm like, well, I was only in this other role for 11. I'm in this one for 12. So I'm predicting my next move now is going to be right into this presidency or to this vice chancellor situation. But that wasn't in the plan. And so I had to just make sure that I followed where I was being led and not predict what was next. So I spent a few years, as an associate vice chancellor. But what it did was it prepared me for additional roles and things of that nature. So I think that advice that I would give, regardless of what type of fast track or track that you might be on, continue to recognize it, follow it. Don't predict what's going to be next. Because I can tell you, Dr. Cross, never in, and my wife and I talk about this now, if I had a dart and throw it at the map of the United States and said, where can I throw this dart? I want it to land on where I believe that I can go as a chancellor or a president and be a great fit, have a good board of trustees, and have good support, good community support. And never would I have imagined it would be at New Mexico Junior College.
Wow.
But this is where he's led me. And this is a great fit for me at this time.
Man, that's I really like that response or that formula because sometimes we do want to predict everything or want to take control of everything or how things should unfold, not realizing that sometimes when things are happening, as you mentioned, it may not be how you think it should, but maybe it's the best situation in that moment. And if we try to take control of every step, we may trip over our own selves. So I really appreciate that perspective. And it's something worth thinking about, especially when you have the desire for growth and progress and impact. So I really appreciate you sharing that formula. I think, as you mentioned, every one of us can use it, as we go forward on our journey. And that leads me to my next question. What is your perspective on the current climate of Black men in society today?
True. And I don't, and that's I don't want to make a generalization.
Correct.
And so it really, my response to that question is, it really depends on the area. If it's sports, if it's entertainment, if it's higher education, if it's K-12, if it's business and industry. And so I think there's a variance. Well, I know there's a variance in reference to my opinion as relates to the current climate for the Black male in each one of those. And so it's not the same. And so what I would say when you think about athletics, for the Black male, I mean, when you think about the current climate, I mean, it's better than it has been, just in reference to opportunities, opportunities to even get the experience with the expansion of various athletic teams on a major league or professional level. And then also opportunities as far as with the income. So that has changed for the Black male. When you think about entertainment, I think there is my perspective, there are additional opportunities as well. I think there's some other stereotypical pitfalls that the Black male can fall within as it relates to the entertainment business. I think we have to be very, very mindful of that. When you think about higher education, I think there are more opportunities now as far as for Black males to get that exposure, to get that experience, even to get the education to be able to be considered to sit at the table. So I think my perspective is actually it just depends on the particular sector for the Black male. But what I will say from a generalization standpoint is that the opportunity to get education, the opportunity to gain experience, an opportunity to gain exposure is greater than it has been in previous years. Again, depending upon the sector. Look at the seat that I'm sitting in. I'm the 7th president of New Mexico Junior College, and my predecessors were all white males. Okay, wow. And so when you think about those opportunities there as well, so you think about certain civic clubs that I've been a part of. First Black male president of those. So those opportunities wouldn't have been there, probably 10, 15, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Again, so I think the perspective, we have to be careful to not generalize. And when I'm mentioning this, Dr. Cross, this is where I'm really focusing on the generalization. We have to really look at, okay, well, what region of the country, okay, what state within that region, what locale even within that state, because there can be a vast difference, between the northern part of a state versus the southern part of the state. And so as that relates to the Black male, I think that's one of the things that we have to do our research. We have to look at and think about, okay, well, what's going to be the most susceptible area for me and my focus for me to make an impact.
And that's a great perspective to know where you are and the impact you want and the experience you want. But as I was listening to you, being in the role and the different things that's happening and how things are progressing and opportunities are opening for us as Black men. And being that, as you shared, you are the first Black male to be in the seat that you're sitting in as the president at the institution. So how can, and I think you kind of answer it in regards to be open to what's happening and the change and be ready to take advantage of those opportunities. So if a Black male don't know what's happening, how would you encourage them to understand what's happening, where they are, and how they can take advantage?
I think taking a historical look back, at where you currently are and what type of momentum, has been gained or lost. I think that's key. I think two, knowing self. I think if you don't know as a black male or as anyone, but specifically as a black male, if you don't know self, when an opportunity you believe has become available, the fit may not be there. And that's important because as a black male, I didn't, and others should not want to become a president or a chancellor or a leader just to be a president or chancellor or a leader. Because if it's not a good fit, it's what I call, we want to be careful that we don't manufacture chaos. And I tell our staff this all the time. Manufactured chaos is not good. And oftentimes we can create chaos ourselves if we don't know self, we don't know the environment and the climate, where we're thinking about locating or staying and growing. And if we don't understand the fit that may or may not happen. I'm not talking about challenges. We all, realize that challenges are just are opportunities. But if you haven't done your homework, and if you're not paying attention, and you can't sense the pulse of where you are, where you want to go, and doing some deep research on that, then the fit is just not going to work. And I've seen colleagues, have health issues. I've seen colleagues have family issues, and personal issues because they did not consider, and no one's perfect.
Correct.
But I think you have to consider all of those variables before you say, well, I just want to go sit and be a president, or I just want to go sit and be a leader. I think it's worth the time to invest in that research.
Man, I really appreciate, that perspective. That is, man, I really value that perspective. And because as men, we sometimes think about where we want to go and the goals we want to achieve. But as you mentioned, that make sure the environment fits who we are and what we want to accomplish. Because as you mentioned, you don't want to go into an area where you create unnecessary chaos because you're in a space that you don't fit well. And that's important. And that's a great perspective. And I think when we're in the right environment, we tend to do better and thrive and make the impact that we want to make. So I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. I think that is something really valuable, as we go forward, when we are thinking about making a difference, when we're thinking about becoming the best version of ourselves and to serve humanity. I think in being in the place that fits us well, or fit our character, our values, our leadership style, I think that's important as we go forward on our journey. So I really appreciate that. So that leads me to my next question. What change do you want to see in general amongst Black men?
And I'm going to go back to the various sectors. So when you think in general, is that I want to be able to see right now the momentum. I believe in opportunity. Opportunities are good. I think the momentum is moving forward, and I think the opportunities are there. I like to, in general, preparedness. I think more preparedness when it comes to our Black males when you're thinking about moving forward is because where preparation meets opportunity, that's the biggest impact. In reference to opportunity, and I'm not prepared. Preparation meets opportunity. So I think that we really have to look and make sure that we've equipped ourselves, and so that when that opportunity arises, that we can say, yes, I'm prepared. In addition to some of the other things that I mentioned as well, and I'll tell you the reason why I mentioned that is preparation meets opportunity, and what we have to look at. I was on a panel probably about 4 years ago, something similar to this. In reference to how do you get Black males to that executive table? And I said, my response, your initial reaction is going to have, it may not be your final reaction. And so my response to getting more Black men to the executive table is that make sure they're ready to come to the table. Okay. Right. Because if I've identified someone in my organization who come to me and said, well, I need to come to the table. Okay, so when they come to the table, they need to be a certain level of composure, a certain level of knowledge, as we just mentioned, a certain level of research and what have you, because some of the comments, uh, that may be said or something they may hear, their initial reaction may not come from a place of knowledge and research and study. And so oftentimes if a person comes to the table too soon or unprepared rather, it can actually help to dismantle some of the things that have been in progress and the momentum has been there. As an example, I can give you, I work for an institution. We received a Title III grant from the Department of Education that focused on African American and Hispanic males. And so we did some great work there as far as moving the student success needle with those two groups of students. And so at the table, you had some would say, well, why are we even having a focus on African American male and Hispanic males? Some of my colleagues, body language and verbalize, well, what do you mean? We don't need to focus on them. But the more appropriate response goes back to what I mentioned as far as the strategic plan, looking at the institutional data, and the response could be, well, the institutional data shows that our African American and Hispanic males are not persisting at the same rate as their peers. So when you think about strategies that we can include that helps us to meet the goals within our strategic plan, we need to have a more dedicated focus on that. So that was a long answer to preparation meets opportunity. And I would like to see that even more in general, because oftentimes, I go to conferences and I see, my fellow colleagues, African American colleagues, and some may say, well, man, you're sitting in the seat. Man, I need to get that doctor. Then I can do this. Then I can do that. But it's about the journey. It's about what do you pick up during the journey? What have you been experienced in? What have you been exposed to? And so that when the opportunity does come about, that you can say, well, yeah, I'm ready for that. So I like to see that in general, that we really make sure that we gain the experience and the preparation so that we can really make that impact. Because, brother, you know as well as I do, sometimes we only get one or two shots.
Correct.
And sometimes people look for us to fail. Again, nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
The more that we can get these experiences and be prepared, then we can have that confidence and that exposure that will continue to help us to thrive and make it.
And thanks for sharing. And I was listening to what you were saying, because being prepared is really important if we're thinking about making the impact and growing and thriving as a collective. But it goes back to where you mentioned recognize and follow where you've been led to, because we're in those spaces, and if we're not paying attention, we may miss the opportunity, which can help us to grow, to develop, to be prepared for the next level where we are being led to. And I really like that you share, and it's a great reminder for all of us on the journey and have the desire to do great work, is that we allow ourselves to be prepared. So when we get to the seat, we can be as competent as possible, because as you mentioned, that sometimes we are not looked at to be successful, but to fail. And as Black men, that is something that we have to be mindful of. It's not to say, but we have to be mindful. We have to prepare ourselves, but not everyone wants us to be successful. So being prepared is really important. So I'm really glad that you shared that. And it's a great reminder for all of us as we go forward to make the impact and the difference that we desire to make. So thanks for sharing it. And that leads me to my next question. What was a pivotal moment in your life?
And I'm going to stay within the journey. And so, as mentioned, I've worked with a program that's working with African American or Black males and Hispanic males. And so I had an opportunity to present our findings and data at national conferences all over the country. This particular situation, I was working at an institution. I had my master's degree, and I was actually at a conference in Atlanta. The conference of the first year experience and students in transition. So a colleague and I, we had some data where we were showing that Black and Hispanic males who were in a class that we taught, we were able to change up the curriculum, infuse some various additional things in the course and what have you. And we were successful, recognized by the Higher Learning Commission, which is an accrediting body. And so as we were providing, and this was at a time that there was this real focus on African American Hispanic males succeeding in higher education, still is, but when it was first hot. And so we had a crowd who was in the audience during a concurrent session, and we had standing room only. We're going through and we're working, and after it was over, I had a colleague, a Caucasian female from my institution, who would open the door for me to to co-author a book with her and some other things, and she said, Derek, you need to get your doctorate. And she said that, and I'm like, it's been a few years since I've had my master's, got my family. I'm really not necessarily, this is the input, advice others give you to see something in you. She said, you need to get your doctorate. And I'm like, I kind of blew her off. And she said, listen, you need to get your doctorate. And here's why. You see this room, how full this room is, and people who are here who are listening. She said, there's another level of impact that you can make, but some people, good friend of mine, some people, Caucasian female, would not even listen to you as a Black male if you don't have that doctor.
Wow.
And it hit me in a strange way at first, in reference to, well, what do you mean? But I knew where she was coming from. As we mentioned in a moment ago, some people, whatever reason, don't like for some groups to succeed, and within that non-succeeding avenue. Sometimes we don't even get looked at to sit in certain seats if we don't have that doctoral degree, right? And so that was a pivotal moment because I had to take an introspective look back and say, well, do I want to face the challenge? Do I want to fight the stereotype that I can do it without it? Or do I want to take some advice from someone whom I hold dear and near as a professional? So it was pivotal. And so I started that journey then. And I believe it's allowed that, in addition to other experiences and exposure, preparation. That was a pivotal time in my career.
And thanks for sharing. And I hope other Black men listening that sometimes we think the opinion others may have is to discredit the work or think we are less than. But sometimes, as it goes back to what you said, sometimes, again, someone sees where we can go and plant that seed, and that we just have to act on it. So we can step into other roles and make greater impact. So, go back to your thought when it comes to being open to, feedback from others so we can take advantage of what's available to us. I just think that is a great experience, or, just a pivotal moment on one's journey, because the person that provides us the insight and perspective and what we can do or where we can go may not always be someone who looks like us. And we have to be open because the person, again, we come across people who sometimes will have our interests of possibility because they see the work that we're doing and say, this is the direction that we need to, especially if we're in the environment and we're doing the work, we have to be open. So I really appreciate you sharing that perspective or that experience on your journey. And that leads me to this question. What life lesson have you learned late in life that you believe is important and can benefit this current generation?
That's a great question, Dr. Cross. Like myself, and I'm sure others, if they were to look back over their lives, educational and career experiences, what would they have done differently? So it goes back to my previous response. Recognize the momentum, recognize what's going on in my life. Follow that as long as that's positive, and at the same time, don't predict the next move. I think that's something we really have to look at, and something if I would have taken advantage of earlier on, I would have saved myself a little undue and unnecessary unnecessary stereotypes or perceptions of others and or institutions. And so recognize, follow, but don't predict what's going to happen next.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And I really like that method. And just listening to the method, I think it's a method that we all can follow, especially on the side that don't predict what's next. We just have to stay open by following how things are unfolding, and also be open, because just listening to you sharing your experience and how people who are not of color, who have seen your potential, and just because you're open and didn't predict who or what's supposed to happen next, you kind of get to position yourself to grow and to experience roles and positions that prepare you for where you are today. So I really appreciate you sharing that formula and how we all can apply it to our own journey, especially when it comes to recognizing what's happening around us and to follow that momentum. I really like the formula. I think it's really applicable, as we continue on our own journey. And that leads me to my next question. Where can the listeners find you and support the great work that you're doing to make a difference?
So I think the number one place they can find me, they can certainly look on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and that's where for some of your listeners there, they can see some of the work that we do here at New Mexico Junior College, some of the things I'm engaged in and involved in, as well as some of the my colleagues across the country in reference to recognizing the good work that they do and that I follow as well. So I think that's probably the most recognizable area with those who, if they're willing to follow the journey, that they can access it from.
Okay, I'll definitely put it in the description so they can connect with you as you continue on your journey. But one thing that I want to ask before we get to the close, the formula of recognizing, follow, and don't predict. Did you came up with that idea, and when did you decide to make that your formula to follow?
Sure. So it was probably about 8 to 9 years ago, as things started to happen on my journey, and within that, I sometimes stop, and I've always tried to take a look and recognize what's going on and follow it. But when I started to predict what was going to happen next, and it didn't happen, and other opportunities arose that were even more impactful. And then I decided, you know what? Let me take a look at this. Let me look and see. And so that's when I coined that phrase: is recognize, follow, but don't predict. Because within that, there are a lot of attributes that comes about from being patient, from being consistent, from making sure that we do recognize and acknowledge and all those kinds of things. So I would say anywhere from 7 to 9 years ago, I started using that particular form.
Thanks for sharing, that formula with us, because I think it's really applicable, as we continue on our journey, just to make sure we are recognizing what's happening around us and be able to follow the momentum and don't predict. I really appreciate that
Good.
formula. So that leads me to my final question. What impact do you want to have on the world?
And I thought about that question, and when there are several responses that came to my mind, but when it boils down to it, I would want someone to take a look at me, where I've come from, who I am, who I've become, who I'm becoming, and to be able to say, well, quite simply, anything is possible. And I think that's what the impact that I would want to have on the world, is that anything is possible especially when you go back to the formula that I mentioned as well. Anything is possible when you allow yourself to be used, to be utilized, to impact change for the better. Anything is possible. So I would hope that that's something that someone could take away. If they were just to take a look and say, well, this guy from the state of Arkansas, and his journey, um, and some of the comments he's made, and saying, well, anything is possible.
And thank you, for sharing your journey and your experience, and to remind us that anything is possible. And because on the journey, we have to sometimes draw inspiration from other people, especially when they are able to go through the process and achieve the goals, sometimes more than what they initially believed was possible. But just thank you for sharing your journey with us and impact that you're making. And again, to remind us that anything is possible. Dr. Moore, thanks for being here on the Black Male Impact. It was a pleasure talking with you and to hear your journey and the impact that you're making.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cross, and continue the great work that you're doing, and the great questions that you have, and sharing that with others as well. I will say, as you've asked about impact, what you're doing is certainly making an impact. And so Godspeed to you and the great work that you continue to do. Thank you for having me.
Thank you again. And I appreciate that. I know as we continue on this journey. And listeners, as always, the goal is to bring guests that we believe will share insights, perspective, and knowledge that can benefit all of us as we continue to press forward on the journey to make a difference, to inspire and impact positive change. Thanks for being with us, and continue to support the work so we can continue to make the impact that we believe is possible. Thanks again for being here with us on the Black Male Impact.